In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural sci-fi metal in Blender. And this sci-fi metal material works really great in both Cycles and Eevee. So we're going to start out by creating this version of the material, which is an Eevee, and I do think it looks really cool in Eevee. We have that nice bloom there and some cool sci-fi details. And then after we create the Eevee version of this material, we will duplicate the material and then create another material that uses displacements in the Cycles render engine. And here is the Cycles version of this material. So in Cycles, we are going to be using the displacements in the node editor to actually displace the mesh. So you can see that all these sci-fi bits here on this cube are actually popping out and being displaced. And you can also see it right there in those final renders. Now, if you'd like to help support me and this channel, as well as get the finished procedural material, then you can get the tutorial files over on my Gumroad store, and you also get access to the tutorial files if you join my Patreon page. And checking out my Gumroad store and Patreon page are really great ways to help support me and this channel. And if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, then you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs. So they're packs of 10 realistic procedural materials created with Blender's procedural nodes. And after this tutorial, if you'd like to learn how to create more procedural materials, then you can check out my Blender procedural material playlist on YouTube. All the links are in the description. And then just one more thing before we get started, I wanted to give a huge thanks to this video's sponsor, Sketchfab. On Sketchfab, you can upload, buy, and sell 3D models and assets. My favorite feature of Sketchfab is that you can preview 3D models online in your browser. You can also purchase models and assets from Sketchfab's model store. You can use the model inspector to preview the wireframe, matte cap, textures, and more before you purchase. Check out Sketchfab with the link below. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how I set up the Blender file if you'd like to set it up the same way that I did. So what I did is I pressed Shift A to go to the add menu, and I added in a cube, and then I also pressed Shift A and I also added a plane because I wanted to see what this material looks like on a flat plane. Now I'm just going to bring the plane over, and then I'm also going to press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate it on the Y-axis, and I'm going to type in 9, 0, and enter to rotate it over by 90 degrees. And then I'm also going to press Tab to go into edit mode, and I want to scale this up bigger. So in edit mode, I'm going to press S to scale, and then I'm going to type 3 and then enter. And then I will press Tab to go back into object mode, and I'll just bring this over. And then for the lighting, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here to light, and I'm just going to add an area light. And then I'm going to press G to grab, and then R to rotate, and I'm just going to rotate it and kind of stick it right here so it's pointing at the objects. And then right over here, if you go to the object data properties of the light, I am going to turn the power up pretty high to like a 500, and then also I'm going to turn the size up right here just to make it a bit bigger. And then to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections, I also added in this Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, so I'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to download and add in the same HDRI that I'm using. So right over here, if you go to the world properties, you can add a new world, and then you can just click right here on this yellow dot next to the color, and you can change it to environment texture, and then you can just open up the HDRI that you've downloaded. And then let's also go over the settings for the render engine. So you can use whichever render engine you want. You can use Blender Eevee or you can use Cycles. If you want to use the displacements at the end of this tutorial, then you're not going to be able to use Eevee because Eevee doesn't support the displacements in the node editor. So if you want to use the displacements, you can change it to Cycles. Now I'm going to start off with Eevee and create the material with Eevee, and then at the end I will switch to Cycles and then add the displacement. Now to make Eevee look a little bit more realistic, I'm going to turn on the ambient occlusion and the screen space reflections, and then also if you want to add a little bit of a glow on the brighter areas, I'm going to be turning on the bloom there, and that'll add a glow to the bright areas. And then I am in the shading tab right up here, so I have the shader nodes right here, and then also right over here I have the 3D space, and I just went up into the rendered view by holding down the Z button and moving up into the rendered view. So let's just select one of the objects, and I'm going to click on new, and I can just rename this material Procedural Sci-Fi Metal. Alright, and then you can also click and drag, and it's going to bring out the material, and you can drop the material onto the other object as well. Alright, so I'm now going to zoom in here to the shader nodes. So the first thing I want to do is make it darker because it's very bright, and because it's so white, it's actually kind of being reflective. So I want to take the base color, and I just want to turn that down to like a gray color so it's not quite as bright. And then also I want to make it a metallic metallic material because it is a metal material. So this metallic value, I'm going to turn that all the way up to 1. So it is now a metal material. And then also you can just turn the roughness down a little bit if you want to. Now I don't just want it to have one roughness value. I want some places on the texture to be more rough and other places on the texture to be less rough. And then I don't want to be using just one roughness value. I instead want to add in a texture that'll control the amount of roughness. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to go to the search here and I'm going to search for the noise texture. So let's click on the noise texture and I'll just drop it down here. And then also I am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on in this tutorial. So it's built into Blender, so you just need to enable it. So if you haven't already enabled the Node Wrangler add-on, you can just click right here on Edit, and then you can open up Blender's user preferences. And then over there on the add-ons tab, if you just search for the Node Wrangler right up there on the search, you can just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and then you can use the features of the Node Wrangler, and then just close the user preferences. So now that you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can select a node, and then you can press Ctrl T. And when you select the texture and press Ctrl T, it's going to automatically add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I don't want to use the mapping in the noise texture, but I am going to be using the mapping node later. So I'm just going to drag the mapping node down, and then I don't want to use the generated texture coordinate. I want to use the object coordinates instead. So I'm going to take the object and I'm going to pull out a wire from the object and put that into the vector. And then also I can just take the object and put that into the vector here as well on the mapping, and we'll be using the mapping node later. Now I want to be able to preview what the noise texture is looking like. So I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key and then select the node. So when you hold down the Control and Shift key and select different nodes, that is going to preview what the node is looking like. And that is a feature from the Node Wrangler add-on. So let's now take the factor value from the noise texture and I'm going to plug that into the roughness of the principled. And then I also want to play around with some of the noise texture settings. So on the detail here, I'm going to bring that all the way up to the max, which is 15. So it has a lot of detail in there. And then I also want to give it some more roughness. So on the roughness value, I'm just going to change that to like a 0.7 so it has more roughness. So I can now hold down the Control and Shift key and then select the principled BSDF, and that is going to preview it. And so because we're plugging the noise texture into the roughness, some parts are going to be more rough, whereas other parts are going to be more shiny. Now I want to have more control over this, so I want to be able to change the colors of the noise texture. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's click on the color ramp, and I'm just going to drop it right in here. So the factor is going to go into the factor of the color ramp, so then the color can go into the roughness value of the principled BSDF. So I can now change the colors in here, and that is going to change how rough it is. So if you make these colors a lighter color, then they are going to be more rough. So I'm going to click on this first tab here, and I'm going to drag this tab over, and that is going to make it a little bit more contrasty. And then you can see that it's pretty shiny, and I don't want it to be that shiny. So if I make the values more white, then they are going to make it more rough. So I can click on the black tab, just click on this little black thing right here. That's going to open up the color, and then I can make it a bit brighter. And you can see as I make it brighter, the material is becoming more and more rough. So I don't want it to be super rough, but also not super shiny. So I'll just bring it to there. So I will just make it a little bit more rough, something like that, but it is a metal material, so it should be somewhat shiny. So this is kind of a cool metal material, but we don't have any of those sci-fi details. So let's create that. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's just click on the Voronoi texture, and I'm going to drop it right down here under the noise texture. Now I do want it to use the object coordinate, so I could plug the object into the vector of the Voronoi, but I want to be able to control the location of the Voronoi texture. So that is where the mapping node comes in. So the object is going to go into the vector, but then we want the mapping node to be going into the vector of the Voronoi. And so then if we change these values, that is going to change the location, rotation, and scale of the Voronoi texture. And then I'm also going to hold down the Control and Shift key and select the Voronoi to preview it. Now that doesn't really look sci-fi, that looks pretty organic. So to make it look more sci-fi, I'm going to click on the F1 and I'm going to change this to F2. And then I'm also going to click on this value right here, and I'm going to instead change this one to the Chebyshev. So now that I've changed this to the Chebyshev, you can see that now we have all of these little squares in here. Now it doesn't look very contrasty, and so I want to make it more contrasty. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a color ramp node. Let's click on the color ramp and drop it down here. And then I can take the distance value from the Voronoi, and I want to drag out a wire and put that into this color ramp. And then to preview the color ramp, I can Control, Shift, and select the color ramp. So now what I can do is I can click on these tabs and I can start to drag them closer together. And you can see as I drag them closer together, it's going to be more contrasty. So I'm going to drag these two values pretty close to each other, so we now have this really cool sci-fi texture right here. So now what I want to do is I want to put this texture into the normal to give it some fake bump, so it looks like it is popping out. So I'm going to take the color and I'm going to put that into the normal, just like that. And then I'm also going to Control Shift and select the principled BSDF to preview the final material. Now you can see that it's not really popping out. Something definitely looks wrong here. And that is because this is color data. It is a yellow dot, but then this here, this is normal data. And so it is purple. And so we need a node in here to convert this color data into normal data. So to convert this, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to go to the search here and I'm going to search for a bump node. So let's add a bump node and I'm going to drop the bump node right in here between this wire and that's going to plug it up. Now I actually want to take the color and I want to put the color into the height value. So now this bump is going to convert color data or black and white data into normal data. And so now if you zoom in here, you can kind of see that it looks like these little squares are being popped out. Now it is way too strong. So on the strength value right here, I'm just going to change this to like a 0.2. So a 0.2 and that is now less strong, but now it looks like these pieces here are all popping out. And then this Voronoi texture is really big. So back over here on the Voronoi texture, I'm going to change the scale just to like a 1.7 so that it is smaller. So that's looking much better. So now we're starting to get a really cool sci-fi texture. Now I also want to add this Voronoi texture into the base color to change the colors, because right now it is just this color here. It's just this color that we added here in the base color, but I instead want to use a texture. So I'm going to take the distance value from the Voronoi texture and I'm going to drag out a wire and I'm going to put that into the base color. But then I want to be able to change the colors in here. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to go to the search here. And again, I'm going to search for a color ramp. So let's click on the color ramp and I'm just going to drop the color ramp right in here between this wire and that is going to plug it up. So the distance is going to go into the factor and then the color can go into the base color. So now we can play around with these colors to change the color of the metal. Now one thing that I want to do is I want to click on this linear and I'm instead going to change it to constant. And that way you can see that there's not any blending between these two colors. So if I now drag the white tab, you can see there isn't any blending, whereas before when I had this set to linear, if I kind of bring these together, you can see there's a bit of a blending. You can see there's white up here and then black there. But if I instead change this to constant, now there isn't going to be any blending. So I want to drag this black tab way over here, and then I'm going to drag this white tab kind of over about here. Now I don't want it to be fully black, so I'm going to click on this black tab and I'm going to click on the color and I'm going to make it a bit brighter so it's kind of just a dark gray. And then I'm going to click on this white tab, and for this white tab I'm going to make it a bit darker so it's going to be kind of a darker gray as well, but not quite as dark. So just something like that is pretty good. Now I also want to add another color value, so you could click on the plus right there to add another tab, but you can also just hold down the control key and then click, and that is going to add another tab right there. And then you can just drag the tab around. I want it to be kind of about there. Now this tab, I'm going to make it an orange color. So I'm going to click on the color here and I'm going to make it very bright. And then I'm going to drag right here and make this an orange color. And then you can also drag this tab around to add more of the orange or less of the orange. I'm going to leave it right here though, because I also want to add another gray color right over here. So what I'm going to do is hold down the control key and then just click right there, and that's going to add another tab right there. And you can see it's the same gray color. So I'm now just going to drag this gray tab over and I'm going to drag it pretty close to the orange. And now you can see that there's just all these little stripes here of orange, and then there also are a few squares here and there. Now I also just want to add one more color in here. I want to add a lighter gray. So I'm going to hold down the control key and just click right in here between these two colors. That's going to add another orange one, but then I can click right here. Let me just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to click on the orange here and I'm going to go to the RGB. So just click over on the RGB and I'm going to drag all of these values up to 1, and that is going to make it fully white. And then I can just click right up here and I can drag this down, and that's going to make it kind of just like a light gray. So now you can see we have 3 different shades of gray, and then we also have the orange colors here and there. All right, so we are almost done with this material, but there is one more thing I want to do. I want to add some little glowing lights on this sci-fi metal. So what I'm going to do is drag these 2 color ramps up because I want to give another space right in here for one more color ramp. So I can now click on this color ramp right down here, the very bottom one, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it. So Shift D is the shortcut key to duplicate the node. So just duplicate that. And then I'm going to take the distance right here from the Voronoi, and I'm going to plug that into the factor. So then I can Control Shift and select this color ramp, and that is going to preview it. So wherever the values are white, that is where it is going to be emitting light. So I'm going to click on this white tab, and I'm going to drag it all the way over here to this side, and then I can drag the black tab over as well. And I do want to drag this black tab pretty far because I don't want very many parts to be emitting light. I just want some little parts here and there to be emitting light. Now also you can see that it's a very dark color. It's kind of a gray color, and that is because this is kind of blending. So I'm going to click on this linear, and I'm going to change this to constant. And there we go. So now it is only white and black. So I now want to put this into the emission value to tell it where it's going to be emitting light. So I can take this color here and I can plug that into the emission on the principled shader. And so wherever it's white, that is where it's going to be emitting light. So I can now Control Shift and select the principled VSDF. And we'll just wait for that material to load up, and you can see that there are those little places where it's emitting light. Now it's not very strong right now, so right underneath this emission value we have an emission strength, so I'm going to turn this up to like a 5, and that way it's going to be much brighter. And then also you could just leave it to this white color, but on this color ramp here I'm actually going to click on this white tab, and then I can make this a color, and that way it'll be the color of the light. So I'm going to keep it pretty bright. I'm going to keep it mostly white, so I'm going to keep it right here in the center, but I'm just going to drag this over a little bit more towards the orange, so it's kind of like a light yellowish orange. And now you can see that glowing there, that glowing is just kind of an orangey color. And there we have it. So there is the finished Eevee version of this material. So just press Ctrl S to save and make sure you save your Blender file. Now before we do the cycles version of this material, if you want to change the mapping of the Voronoi texture, you can change this mapping right here. So if you want to change where the texture is placed, you can drag the X right here, so the X location, and you can see it's going to drag the location of that texture, and so it'll kind of change the texture. You could also change the Y value, and that'll go back and forth. But what you can also do, and this is like the coolest part, is you can drag the Z value. So when you drag the Z value, it's changing the location of the Voronoi texture on the Z axis, and so it's basically going to randomly generate the sci-fi texture differently every time you move it. So I'm now going to duplicate this Blender file and then make the version for cycles. So I'm going to press Ctrl S again to save, just save this Blender file, and then I'm going to click on File, and I'm instead going to click on Save As. And when you do that, Blender's file browser will come up, and then I'm not going to rename this to Tutorial because this is the current version. I want to create another version which is for cycles. So I'm going to rename this to Tutorial Cycles, alright, Tutorial Cycles, and I will click on Save As. You don't have to follow along with that though if you just want to do this within the same Blender file. So now let's change this blend file over to cycles. So I'm going to make the properties right here a bit bigger, just kind of bring this out, and then I'm going to click on the render engine, and I'm instead going to change this to cycles. So we're going to use the cycles render engine, and you can see it looks very similar. Now I am going to be using the displacement, so let me show you how to set that up. Now I'm also going to be using the adaptive displacement, and so what that's going to do is it's going to add more detail where you're closer up to the mesh, but then if you're farther away, it'll add less detail. So you don't have to use the adaptive displacement if you don't want to, but if you want to use the adaptive displacement, then right here under cycles, you need to change the feature set to experimental. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to click right down here on the material properties, and you need to open up the settings tab right here. Now, right now on this displacement, it is set to bump only, but I want to tell the material to use the displacement. So I'm going to now change this to displacement and bump. And then I'm also going to hold down the Z button, go back into solid view and let go. And I'm going to hold down the shift key and just select both of these objects. And then I'm going to press the tab key to go into edit mode. So these objects are very low poly and they don't really have any detail. So I want to subdivide these so that they have more detail for the displacement. So I use the right click select. So I use the W key to make the object context menu come up. You can also just right click and then the object context menu will appear. And I'm going to click on subdivide. So after you click on subdivide, you can see that it's actually subdivided the mesh. And then right behind me, if you click on that little subdivide setting right there, you can just open that up. And then right up here, you can change the number of cuts. So I'm going to turn the number of cuts up pretty high, maybe to just like a 10. And then I'm going to press tab to go back into object mode. And I will just select the plane and then I will tab to go back into edit mode on just the plane. And then again, using the object context menu, you can click on subdivide, and I'm just going to subdivide the plane a little bit more because the plane is bigger. And on the number of cuts here, I'll just change this to like a 2, and then I can just click on this little arrow here to hide the subdivide settings. And I can just hit the tab key to go back into object mode. So we've added some detail, but I also want to add more detail, and so I'm going to be adding the adaptive subdivision. So I'm going to click right over here on the modifier properties and then just select one of the objects. So to add the adaptive subdivision or the adaptive displacement, I'm going to click on add modifier, and under generate, I'm going to add the subdivision surface modifier. Now you can see that when you add the subdivision surface, it kind of smooths out the edges. So right here from Catmull Clark, I'm going to instead change this to simple, and now you can see those edges are very straight. Now to use the adaptive subdivision, it's right here. You can just check mark the adaptive subdivision. Now on the dicing scale, if you make this value smaller, then it's going to be more detailed, but then if you make this value bigger, it's going to be less detailed. So I really don't need the dicing scale to be set to 1. That's actually pretty high detail. So I'm going to click on the dicing scale, and I'm going to change this to like a 20. So I'll just change it to like a 20. And you can see right here that it tells us that the final scale is going to be more detailed, but the viewport will be less detailed just so that it'll render faster in the viewport. So I basically want to do the same thing for this cube. So I'm going to click on the cube, and I can click on add modifier, and then I'm going to add the subdivision surface. And then I want to click on the adaptive subdivision, and then you can see that the subdivision surface kind of smooths out the edges here. So if you want to, you can change this to simple. I am actually going to leave this at Catmull Clark because I do like kind of the smoothing there on the cube. I think that looks pretty nice. And then there are just 2 more things I want to do. In object mode, I'm going to use the object context menu to shade the cube smooth. And then I'm also going to again tab into edit mode, and then using the object context menu again, I'm going to subdivide this one more time so that those edges are more sharp. And then I can just tab to go back into object mode. All right, so then on the dicing scale again, just select the cube. And on the dicing scale, I really don't need it to be set to 1. That's actually pretty high detail. So I'm going to click on this value, and I'm just going to change it to like a value of 20. All right, so I'm now going to hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view. And let's also press Control S to save the Blender file. So you can see there is the texture, but it's not actually being popped out of the mesh. So what I need to do is put a value here into the displacement. So I'm first going to press Shift A, and then I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the displacement node, and I'm going to put the displacement node right here under the principled shader, because just like this bump node, we use this bump node to convert color data into normal data. So I need the displacement node to convert color data into displacement data. So I'm going to take the displacement and I'm going to drag this right up here into the displacement on the material output. Now you can see that it is kind of distorting the mesh. So I now want to add in a texture here to tell it where it's going to displace the mesh. So we already have the perfect texture for that, and that is this color ramp right here, because this color ramp, if I Control Shift and select it, you can see this color ramp here has all of the boxes. So I'm just going to Control Shift and select the principled BSDF again, and I'm going to take the color right here, and I'm going to plug the color from this bottom color ramp into the height value of the displacement. And now you can see that those boxes are popping out, and it looks really cool and sci-fi. Now this is popping out way too much, and I don't want it to be popping out this much. So on the scale here, I'm going to click on the scale on the displacement, and I'm just going to change it to like a 0.06. So a 0.06, and that way it's still going to be popping out, but it's much less strong. And you can really see it on the cube. It looks especially good on the cube. So you can see right there, all those little bits and pieces are all popping out, and that makes it look really cool and sci-fi. And of course, if you wanted to, you could turn the scale up, like for instance, maybe a scale of 0.4, and that is really going to pop out the mesh, but I don't really like that. That is kind of popping out too much. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 0.06. So a 0.06. And so that looks really cool. It kind of looks like some sort of sci-fi storage box with like little bits popping out here and there. So that is it. That is the finished Cycles version of this sci-fi metal. So I'll just give this a final render now. So there we have it. So there is the finished procedural sci-fi metal material. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you learned some stuff from it as well. And if you'd like to help support me and this channel, as well as purchase the procedural material, then you you can get that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the video description. And another great way to help support the channel is by checking out the YouTube memberships. So if you click on that join button down there next to the subscribe button, if you join my memberships, then you'll be helping to support the channel each month, and you'll also get some cool perks here on YouTube. And if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs. And if you'd like to learn how to create all of my procedural materials, then you can check out my Blender procedural material playlist on YouTube. All the links are in the description. So I hope you found this video helpful, and thank you for watching.